I've always been drawn to abandoned places. There's something oddly fascinating about walking through spaces that have been left behind, forgotten by time. Over the years, I've explored countless buildings, factories, old houses, hospitals, all left to decay. But one evening, I came across a warehouse on the outskirts of town, tucked away behind thick brush. It looked like it had been forgotten for decades. The warehouse was huge, its brick walls cracked, windows shattered or boarded up, and the front doors barely hanging from rusted hinges. No signs of security, just the empty silence of abandonment. I entered without much thought, snapping photos as I went, documenting the decay for my channel. The air smelled musty, heavy with the scent of mildew and dust. Inside, the space was enormous. The floor was covered with old crates, rusted machines, and piles of debris. I moved deeper into the building, my flashlight cutting through the thick darkness, my camera capturing the desolation. For the first hour, everything felt normal. Just another empty, decaying structure, exactly the kind of place I usually explored. As I moved into a side hallway, I noticed a small door, barely visible behind a stack of crates. It wasn't locked, just ajar, like it had been waiting for someone to open it. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly, and found a staircase leading down into a basement. The air down there was colder, the dampness more pronounced. I hesitated for a moment, but my curiosity got the better of me. I descended the stairs, each step echoing through the basement. The space was even bigger than I expected. There were more scattered machines, overturned shelves, and debris everywhere. The light from my flashlight couldn't seem to penetrate the far corners. As I walked deeper into the basement, I noticed a figure sitting against the wall in the far corner. I thought it was a mannequin or some discarded clothes, but as I stepped closer, I realized it was a person. He was sitting completely still, his head lowered, hands resting at his sides. My stomach churned. What was someone doing down here? The warehouse had been abandoned for years. I hadn't seen anyone else since I entered. I called out to him, but there was no response. The figure remained motionless, eyes closed, breathing slow and steady. He wore tattered clothes, but what really unsettled me were his eyes. When I got close enough to see them, his eyes were wide open, unblinking. I took a step back, unsure of what to do. Maybe he was a homeless, someone who had somehow found their way into the building. But he didn't seem like he was just resting. He didn't move, not even when I spoke to him again. I stood there debating whether to leave, but just as I turned to go, the figure moved. It wasn't a sudden lunge, but a slow, deliberate shift of the head. His eyes didn't blink. He just kept staring ahead, fixed on nothing, or perhaps on me. I stepped back again, trying to make sense of it. That's when I noticed the scraping sound. It started faintly, like something dragging across the concrete floor. I tried to figure out where it was coming from. The figure hadn't moved its legs, so it couldn't be him, but the sound was unmistakable, getting louder, closer. I didn't wait. I turned and bolted up the stairs, my heart pounding in my chest. The sound followed me, growing louder with every step I took. The figure wasn't walking, but the dragging sound was getting closer. I reached the main floor, but I didn't stop. I didn't even take a breath until I was outside, gasping for air, the cool night hitting me like a slap. I glanced around, my mind racing to process what had just happened. I pulled out my camera to check the footage, hoping to make sense of it, but when I watched it back, there was nothing unusual. The footage was clear, crisp. No figure in the corner, or sound of dragging. The next day I returned to the warehouse, hoping to understand what had happened, but the place was sealed tight. No signs of anyone entering. The warehouse was still abandoned. As I stood outside, I remembered something I had read while researching the warehouse's history. It had once been a warehouse for an old industrial factory that had shut down decades ago. The building had been abandoned long before the city even knew about it, and there had been rumors of unsafe work conditions. I found an old news article that mentioned an incident in the late 80s, an accident involving workers who had been trapped in the basement after a structural failure. A few of them had disappeared without a trace. The company had covered it up, but there were whispers of something darker happening down in that basement. It hit me all at once. The person I'd seen in that corner might not have been a wanderer or a homeless person. He might have been someone who had been trapped there for far longer than I realized. I haven't gone back since. I don't think I ever will. But every time I close my eyes, I can still hear that dragging sound, faint and distant, and I wonder what exactly happened to those who were lost in that building. Urban exploration had always been our thing. We were a group of 4, Tom, Liam, Emily, and I. We had checked out abandoned buildings, underground bunkers, even an old amusement park once. One day we heard about a tunnel deep in the woods, hidden behind collapsed fencing and overgrown brush, so we decided to explore it. According to rumors, it was part of an old railway project that had been abandoned mid-construction. No official explanation why, just left to rot. The entrance was wide and gaping, swallowed by darkness. The moment we stepped inside, the air turned stale, thick with damp earth and rusted metal. Our flashlights barely cut through the darkness ahead. The walls were lined with rusted rail tracks, graffiti scrawled in places, but otherwise the tunnel was empty. We walked for what felt like forever, but in reality, maybe 30 minutes. The deeper we went, the more suffocating the silence became. Even our footsteps seemed swallowed too quickly by the walls. That was when we noticed something strange. We saw footprints, fresh ones. They weren't ours, these were older, slightly smudged, but recent enough that they hadn't faded completely. A single set, leading deeper into the tunnel. We stopped, exchanged uneasy glances. There was no reason for anyone to be here. Tom muttered something about turning back. Liam, always the reckless one, said we'd come this far, might as well see where they led, so we followed. The tunnel stretched on, the footprints becoming more erratic. Some dragged, others staggered, like whoever made them had started limping. The air grew colder, heavy with moisture, and I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. Then Emily whispered, "Stop." Up ahead, a shape lay crumpled on the ground. As we got closer, the beam of Liam's flashlight landed on it, and my stomach turned. It was a backpack. A phone lay next to it, screen shattered, long dead. A few feet away, a shoe. No person, just their things, abandoned in the middle of the tunnel, like they had been dropped in a hurry. Liam knelt, picked up the phone. The case was scuffed, scratched like it had been scraped against the tunnel walls. He turned it over, and his face changed. There were deep grooves in the plastic, like someone had tried to claw it apart with their nails. A metallic clang echoed from deep inside the tunnel. It didn't sound like an animal or a shifting rock. It sounded deliberate, like something had just moved. We didn't wait to find out what. We turned and ran, sprinting back toward the entrance, the tunnel stretching longer than it should have. The air felt heavier, like it was pressing against us, slowing us down. By the time we made it outside, gasping for air, the woods had never felt so open, so safe. We never figured out who left those footprints or why they had stopped so suddenly. But someone had been there, and they never came out. I've always been drawn to abandoned places, the kind that feel like time just stopped, leaving everything to rot in silence. My friend Emma never understood my fascination, but she came along anyway when I told her about an old mansion deep in the woods. The house had been empty for decades, or so people said, but rumors persisted about noises in the night, about doors that led nowhere, about how the house seemed bigger on the inside than it looked from the outside. So I wanted to see it for myself. We arrived just before sunset. The house was enormous, its roof sagging, windows dark and empty. Vines snaked up the walls as if nature was trying to pull it back into the earth. The front door was unlocked, swinging open with a groan as we stepped inside. The air was thick with dust, the floor littered with debris. We moved through the halls, filming as we went. Every room was the same broken furniture, peeling wallpaper, forgotten remnants of the past. The hallways twisted in strange directions. Doorways appeared where they shouldn't, and some rooms seemed too small, as if space had been stolen from them. Then, in a narrow back corridor, we found a door, half buried behind broken boards and debris, as if someone had tried to seal it shut. It didn't match the rest of the house. It was plain, unmarked, and the wood was in better condition than anything else we'd seen. I hesitated before pushing it open. Inside was a small, windowless room. The walls were bare concrete. The only thing in the room was a single wooden chair, placed exactly in the center. The air was different here, heavier, stagnant, carrying a faint, sour smell that made my stomach turn. Emma shifted uncomfortably. "This doesn't feel right." I stepped inside, sweeping my flashlight over the walls. That's when I saw deep scratches, carved in frantic patterns, tally marks, long, desperate gouges. Someone had been locked in here. For how long? I turned to Emma, but she was already backing toward the door. "We need to go," she said. I nodded, but as I turned, something else caught my eye. Near the base of the chair, something small and dark was wedged into a crack in the floor. It was a rusted metal ring. The room wasn't just a forgotten space, it was a cell. We didn't say a word as we left. The house suddenly felt different, like we weren't supposed to be there, like we had uncovered something meant to stay buried. I never posted the footage. Some places aren't meant to be explored.